Whenever you're feeling kind of stressed and overwhelmed and you're looking for a corresponding story in the gospel which is very much on point, this is a pretty good option. You also have Mark chapter 1, right? So the story of Jesus healing Simon Peter's mother-in-law. Now, interesting thing about this story, not so much the actual healing, but what happens afterwards. So once he heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law, word gets around the town. So people start bringing to the Lord all sorts of people in various forms of need. And then Jesus does the thing that he does. So he heals the sick, he casts out demons, he teaches them many things. They're like sheep without a shepherd. And then he goes up the mountaintop to behold his Father in heaven, to kind of put himself in this stance of intense prayer. And then Simon Peter, on behalf of all the disciples, on behalf of all the people, he goes looking for the Lord, and he says to the Lord, look, everyone is looking for you. Everyone is looking for you. Loosely translated, look, yesterday was a pretty good day. You did a lot of good. We can make that 2 days in a row. And the Lord, perhaps surprisingly, says, no, we're going to move on to the next town and preach the good news there also, because that's the reason why I've ultimately come. And with that, the story ends. Now, two kind of takeaway messages, two principles to be articulated with regards to this story. First of all, this notion of what we might call the tyranny of the should. The tyranny of the should. You go back to the gospel, right? The Lord is bombarded with all sorts of people who propose to him, here's something you should do. An opportunity to do some sort of good thing. Here's something that you could do, you do it pretty well, and no one can do this thing better than you. No one can teach like you can. No one can cast out demons. No one can heal like you can. So therefore, because you could do it, because you have the ability to do it, you should do it because we're asking you. And again, the Lord says no. His sole focus is to do what the Lord is calling him to do. You put a pause on that and think about how counterintuitive that is. What does it mean to be a good Christian? What does it mean to enter a stance of like Christian charity? If someone asks me to do something, I should do it right away in the manner they ask me to do it. Whereas actually it's like, no. Your primary focus is to do what the Father wants you to do and to be who the Father wants you to be. The non-Catholic Christian Rob Bell talks about this, right? So with regards to the Gospel of Luke, where people are going is very important. So, for example, in the Gospel of Luke chapter 9, what we hear is that Jesus sets his face towards the city of Jerusalem. Chapter 12, what we hear is that Jesus teaches people on the way to the city of Jerusalem. Chapter 17, you hear that Jesus heals people on the way to Jerusalem. Chapter 19, what you hear is that he tells the disciples, look, I'm going to go ahead of you to the city of Jerusalem. And Rob Bell says after a while, you get a sense Jesus Christ is going somewhere, and that somewhere is Jerusalem. Right? Now, certainly, Jesus Christ is an itinerant preacher, and you see that in today's gospel too. So occasionally, recurringly, frequently, he stops to cure the sick and to cast out demons and to teach people many things. But the idea is that none of these things take him away from his essential sense of mission. In a certain sense, the reason why I've come is to suffer and die for the salvation of the world on the cross in the holy city of Jerusalem. So again, the tyranny of the should. Now, the second point is this notion of beholding the Father in heaven. So again, after he heals these people and casts out demons, he goes at the mountaintop and he beholds his Father in heaven to pray to his Father in heaven. The whole idea is that the world will never encourage you to go the way of integrity. The world always pulls you in a multitude of different directions. Again, the tyranny of the should, right? And so the whole idea is that I need to protect my sense of integrity. And a really important prerequisite to kind of achieve that particular end, you need to pray. You need to immerse yourself in a stance of serious prayer. Not simply saying prayers, but actually praying, beholding the Father in heaven. Because you're meant to enter into a stance of discernment, to be super clear about who he wants you to be and what he wants you to do, to make sure you don't spend even the slightest amount of time and energy in a direction which is not sustained by his particular call for your life, right? You always go back to this notion that the enemy of the best is not the worst. The enemy of the best is the good. There are so many people out there in the world, people of goodwill, who have nothing left for the things of God or even for themselves because they've given their hearts and their lives to merely good things. Not evil things, not wicked things, but things which are merely good. The tyranny of the should. Something which falls just beyond the scope of God's particular will for your life, as a result of which I'm spiritually dissipated in my heart. Right? Interesting kind of side note, Stephen Covey talks about this, right? So he has this really great book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And basically, in terms of that particular book, he talks about what's called a time management matrix. So you imagine a situation of like 4 quadrants based on 2 different spectrums with 2 different extremes. So important and not important, urgent and not urgent. And basically what he says is that, yeah, certainly there are moments where there's a situation which is actually urgent and important, like your house is burning down. But how often does your house burn down, right? And what he's suggesting is that a lot of times we don't really live the reflective life, as a result of which we're giving our hearts and our time and attention to all sorts of things which actually are not important. And so you're called to be kind of sober in that regard. Like, how am I living my life? How am I giving my time and attention? To make sure you're primarily giving your time and attention to things which are actually important, quite apart from whether or not they're actually urgent or not. It's a really important principle to keep in the back of your mind. One final example, I'll end with this. One of my favorite saints is St. Jane de Chantal, the 17th century saint. And you'll find her story infinitely relatable. So first of all, back in the day, she married a wealthy baron. That part's not relatable. But what happened is that her husband was killed accidentally in a hunting expedition. And so all of a sudden, she was left in a pickle. So now I'm a single mom in my late 20s with 4 small kids. And just imagine that sudden change in circumstance. And so she felt kind of overwhelmed with life, right? Going the way of haste, perpetual stress. And so she turned to her friends, like, who can I talk to give me spiritual direction, to put me on the path of the Lord? And all her friends, funny enough, recommended the same guy. And to put it nicely, this guy was a product of his time. So basically what he said to her is like, look, the path to holiness and sanctity, long convoluted prayer routines, and really difficult, lengthy penitential practices. Now imagine you're a single mom in your late 20s with 4 small kids. Her situation did not become better, it actually became way worse. And now she was losing her mind. So then she thought, okay, I'm desperate, so I'm going to talk to my local bishop. And the local bishop was, wait for it, St. Francis de Sales. Lucky her. So St. Francis de Sales looked at her and was very practical and concrete. It's like, look, you were a single mom with 4 small kids. So you got to be like really practical. So he would tell her certain things like, look, the path to sanctity is not one size fits all. So don't feel bad that you can't pray like a cloistered monk because you're a single mom in your late 20s with 4 small kids. The other thing is, never go the way of haste. Occasionally there'll be moments and perhaps even seasons where you're called to go the way of haste, but you got to realize the default setting is rhythm and balance, purpose and direction, right? So don't go the way of haste. And even in that, don't be hasty. On top of that, he would say to her, like, be patient. Sometimes, many times, the day is not going to play out the way you expected. So be patient when the day doesn't play out according to your expectations. But on top of that, especially, be patient with yourself. And the final thing was like, look, you're called to be yourself. Don't try to be someone else. Just be yourself, but the perfect version of yourself. Now, you put together all these different things. It's surprising, perhaps, in a certain sense, but it gives you a particular image of the spiritual life. Your life is not meant to be perpetually chaotic. You're meant to have a sense of natural rhythm and repose and purpose and mission, because in that you find peace, and in that you find your true self.